Teisha Bader with the JBS News Update for Tuesday, December the 23rd, 2014. Ynet reports, citing a report by the Algeria Press Service, that Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas stated that the PA would stop cooperating with Israel if its resolution to the UN Security Council, which calls for a deadline for Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank, does not pass. Abbas reportedly made the comments while visiting Algeria today, saying that in the event the resolution fails, Palestinians will begin a series of policies and legislation against Israel and will, quote, stop all joint operations with Israel and demand that Israel be held responsible because it is an occupying country. The PA resolution was submitted to the UN Security Council by Jordan last week. It calls for a peace agreement with Israel within a year, an end to all settlement construction, the sharing of Jerusalem as a capital and recognition of a Palestinian state, and Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank by the end of 2017. And the Palestinians began bringing in machinery yesterday to set up Gaza's first Coca-Cola plant. Israel allowed for 10 trucks to enter the Gaza Strip for this purpose, saying it hoped the new plant would provide jobs for hundreds of Palestinians. The Coke factory is aiming to be up and running by the end of next year. The Times of Israel reports that 2 Jewish settlers were sentenced to 30 months in prison for setting several Palestinian cars on fire in the Arab village of Farata in the West Bank last year. Yehuda Landsberg and Yehuda Savir from the Gilad Farm outpost in the West Bank sentence was the longest given for a price tag attack against Palestinians. Price tag attacks refer to actions of vandalism by Jewish right-wing extremists to protest Israeli government policies in the West Bank and in response to Palestinian terror. Police in France are investigating an attack last night on the office of a Paris area synagogue. JSS News website reports that a bullet fired from an air gun went through a window of the office of the David Ben Ishai synagogue in Belleville. The rabbi and his assistant were in the synagogue at the time but were not injured. 2 suspects were seen outside the synagogue building about 10 minutes before the incident, and police were searching for them. And with anti-Semitic incidents on the rise in France and across Europe in general, Jewish groups expressed their disappointment with the European Union over their failure to establish a task force to deal with the phenomenon. The European Parliament did, however, create a task force to deal with racism and diversity in general, but Jewish groups fear this is not sufficient. Executive Director of the American Jewish Committee, David Harris, said the failure to set up the special body was, quote, an inexcusable dereliction of duty. Harris said, noting that the, quote, roots and motives behind anti-Semitism are often different from other forms of bigotry. He said subsuming this very specific problem among other forms of racism and diversity reveals how some parliamentarians, despite the long shadow of anti-Semitism on the European continent, have yet to come to grips with the seriousness and uniqueness of the problem. Polish Chief Rabbi Michael Shudrich told the Jerusalem Post that the decision not to form a task force, quote, shows a politicization of fighting anti-Semitism to an unprecedented level of cynicism. Anti-Defamation League National Director Abe Foxman called the Parliament's decision another failure of European leadership to recognize and understand their responsibility to assure the Jews of Europe a future of safety and dignity. He told the Jerusalem Post, at the very moment when bold measures are called for to meet the challenges to Jewish life in Europe, the European Parliament has said, we really don't care. A teenager who was part of an anti-Semitic incident this past summer in Australia is receiving a unique educational sentence for his offenses. The teen, who is a minor, was one of a gang of 5 who got on a bus full of Jewish school children in Sydney in August and began taunting and intimidating the children with violent threats and anti-Jewish chants. 2 of the offenders received cautions and 2 were let go. The 5th, however, will participate in several educational experiences as part of an agreed settlement with the New South Wales Police and with the Sydney Jewish community. The teen, who already attended a justice conference in which he was faced with one of his victims and her family, where he expressed regret, We'll visit the Sydney Jewish Museum, attend a family Shabbat meal, and read Holocaust literature. And turning now to our programming for tonight, Tuesday, December the 23rd. Coming up at 7 o'clock, our continued exclusive coverage of the 2014 Saban Forum with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address via satellite from Israel. And Secretary of State John Kerry presents the American administration's position on the Israeli-Palestinian peace process and America's negotiations with Iran. And then later tonight on the Chaim at 9 o'clock, Mark Golub sits down with Mark Langfan, chairman of AFSI, Americans for a Safe Israel, who talks about the history and geography of Israel and the West Bank. That's tonight on JBS and jbstv.org. And that's the JBS News Update for Tuesday, December the 23rd, the last night of Hanukkah. I'm Teisha Bader. Chag Sameach.